Super profundo on the early eve of your day. Thanks for joining me on Out of the Cave, where we reimagine what society can be if given a fresh start. I'm your host, JP Taxman, a designer, thinker, and realist, searching for the right questions to get the right answers to create a society that is better and not perfect. So how important do you think open, honest, and empathetic communication is in your relationships? What might a society look like if everyone was taught to communicate that way from an early age? Aaron Freeman and I discuss the importance of creating a culture of open, honest, and empathetic communication in relationships within the new society. Aaron is a co-author of The New Power Couple, a professional speaker, relationship coach, and angel investor. He has co-founded and launched the Empowered Couples University, an online university hosting higher education for motivated couples to fulfill their life, business, and relationship goals. He has shared the stage with Tony Robbins and Golden Gavel Hall of Fame speakers and has been featured in national media for coaching couples to fulfill their dreams together and live in their full potential. He hosts one of the top relationship podcasts on iTunes and is passionate about investing in socially conscious businesses. One of the companies he angel invested in was featured on the ABC show Shark Tank in October 2017. And what they made is delicious. I've had it. It's a dessert hummus. Aaron runs a leading relationship coaching and certification program and speaks to the world in his mission to reach 1 million people to have thriving relationships at home and in business. Man, Aaron is just an amazing guy, isn't he? On another note, after listening to this episode, if you enjoyed what you heard, I'd appreciate it if you could share this episode with one friend. Or if you're feeling generous, you could hop on over to Patreon and support me there at patreon.com/outofthecave. I'll also be sharing the link in the show notes if you want to go find it there. I've got some really cool rewards on my Patreon page. Like, if you support me, you get to be a character in a story about the city actually operating and working, which will be released once a month after I get a few supporters, and you'll get to be one of those characters that will be on the show every month. And now, let's take our 14th step out of the cave with Aaron Freeman.
You gonna have fun?
We're gonna have fun. Just like I do in all the other ones, just to get us in the frame, and also the listeners kind of in the frame mindset of the discussion. Let's imagine that we purchased an island off the coast of Fiji. Our goal is to create an optimized society fresh from start, meaning we'll rethink the entire fabric of the society, ranging from the culture, values and norms, to the economic structures, educational systems, government systems, and the urban development landscape. So keep in mind that I can provide you with whatever resources necessary within, the bounds of physics and, of course, what's available on Earth. So communication, as you well know, is likely the most important skill to master as a human being, because in order to do things, we kind of need to know how to communicate better and build stuff, and to navigate our own lives. So when thinking about creating the society, where would you start to create a society where everyone communicates effectively and openly with one another?
Well, that was a great start, by the way. And one of the things that makes me think of initially is the use of money, right? And we're going to talk about relationships and communication. So money actually is what? A representation, actually a symbol that represents value. Yeah. And as far as I know, it came from back in, let's call it England, where the royals needed to go to war, so they gathered up the gold from the citizens and then said, here's a note that after we pay for all the war efforts, you can turn it back in and we'll give you your gold. Right? So it really was representation, but we've made it into something else, I believe. And whatever that is, something around it, it gives us our own value. So initially that would be, for me, the place to start is we'd want to get rid of money and actually have currency be human capital, meaning the relationships that you have, the people that you know, maybe the gifts and the talents of others is what you actually collect and we can say trade in rather than currency in the form of, paper money or gold or whatever. If we could actually start with the foundation of people saw human capital as the most important currency, I think that would be a place to start.
I mean, I totally agree. I've thought immensely about money in, working on this project and thinking about creating a new society, because that's a pivotal point. How do we exchange goods and services, and how do we engage with one another on that form to progress? And thinking about money, how do you do it, and how do you make it in a way that people it doesn't run their lives? It should be a way to just let people engage with one another and trade effectively, but it shouldn't be the end all be all, right? And it should be I don't think it should be as much of a social status as well. Like, you're going to have social status in some regard, but it should only be like, okay, we view it very much like, if you don't have money, people are kind of like, well, I don't know what you're doing. Like, well, on the other side, if you do have a lot of money, you're seen as like, you got your stuff together, you know what's going on, you have a lot of, power or whatever.
Yeah, people want to be around you more. They want to know what you believe. They want to know what you did. How can they make more from what you did?
Exactly. It gives you an automatic sense of, like, you know what you're doing, you know what's going on, which isn't necessarily all the case. Like, I meet a lot of wealthy people, and I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like, okay, all right, if you figured out how to play that game.
Actually, to throw out the other side of it even, entitlement. So that's probably one of the things that scares people most. And this is not to say that in this conversation we're on one side of the other, but that's one of the biggest holdbacks of getting rid of money in a way, or allowing for it to be equal, is that would possibly allow some people to feel like they're entitled, or be lazy and sit back and not offer their gifts and just kind of receive from the efforts of others, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest points for a lot of people with money is, well, if this person's not going to hold their weight or pull their own value, why should they just get?
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of it, too, is we should create a way for people just have what they need and work within that means, and be like, okay, you might need more money if you have a lot more currency, let's say, if you have more family, you're going to need to get more resources, because there's got to be some kind of exchange of resources. There's got to be some way to know how, okay, you have this thing and I need that thing. How do we make a valuable exchange so we both come off better off, and one you don't get the other darker side where you have someone who kind of learns how to play that game, is able to just collect from everybody and start infinitely ruling, and you get a dictatorship going. There needs to be some kind of amalgamation of people helping each other out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a little off.
No, it's a great place to look, because at its basics we have to have our human needs met, right? Yeah. So that's, I don't know if that's coming from a place that we already know, but that's got to be a foundation. People have to be able to survive. Yeah. They have to have shelter, food, water. Yeah. In a sense, if you look even at basic needs, people need also connection. Yeah. Right? So maybe going a step up from what your physical body needs, as we level up in the human needs, right? You have, as like Tony Robbins references a lot, people have this need for certainty, to feel safety and security. You have your uncertainty. There's a sense of variety and spontaneity that we need to not feel so bored with life, and to continue to expand and grow and create and innovate, right? That kind of comes from that uncertainty. Then there's significance, there's growth, and there's love, connection. Like, human connection is one of the main basic human needs that we all need. So I think once we can kind of figure out how to cover those bases, and then what people have the skills in our, let's just call it community, who's someone that can bring people together and have a collective experience feeling connected, who can be the cook, who can, get the food, who can build the homes. And it sounds like we're almost going to a very tribal type of place, but maybe that's a place we need to start, and then we can maybe bring technology in to enhance and provide better benefits and convenience. So I don't know, if we were starting from scratch, maybe we do go to a tribal type of place first.
I think you definitely do. I think you focus more on building smaller communities within a bigger community. I think the idea would be, maybe a couple 100,000 people within this society, but really focusing on, because within 100,000 people, it's really hard to still connect with a bunch of people. I mean, we build smaller communities, but really focusing on little, tight-knit, maybe just micro cities within a bigger city that kind of are able to operate and function within themselves. And then you might get better connection between people, because people are able to really find and connect with that community they want to be a part of. And they end up being more fulfilled because they're able to form and forge those relationships, right?
Which makes me think probably where human societies initially started from, and probably what the United States was initially probably founded on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just finding that again a little bit. I actually was looking the other day at some statistics where in cities with 100,000 people or more, there's actually a significantly lower crime rate, and violent crime rate specifically. So like if there are more than 100,000 people in a city, there's going to be a lot more crime, because I think people are able to connect and find each other a little more easier when there are less people and it's less like congested, and people maybe aren't quite as angry because maybe they're able to like get around a little bit easier too. Yeah. Whatever it may be.
Just on that point, just to throw things out there, I think we're just throwing things up against the wall to see what sticks. I also saw a stat that said Singapore has the lowest, one of, if not the lowest crime rates. That's also because they're like capital punishment, like you can be like put to death for putting gum on the ground. So you have this almost level of, well, who would decide what, but maybe that's based on like a reward punishment system, which may or may not be the best for the collective. But it's funny you mentioned crime rate, where it's like, yeah, if it's just really clear that something as simple as breaking a law, like putting gum on the ground or stealing, you get your arm chopped off, or
I mean, this is an interesting topic because it came up in the last conversation I had with Ryan Naylor. I don't know if you know who he is. He runs localwork.com. He's a really cool and smart guy. But he talked about the reward and punishment kind of system. And one thing I brought up there too as well is the idea of not having reward and punishment be so much an external, but having it be more an internal thing where people get to kind of decide their own rewards and punishments. So, again, I don't know how this would work. I'm going to have to talk, I don't know who exactly about this idea, but having it so people learn from the beginning, like, okay, here are the things we don't want you to be doing. These are things that are bad for you. You're going to want to do them, and you're going to, probably end up doing them. If we catch you doing these things, however we decide to catch people doing it, you choose what your punishment is going to be. And I feel by giving people that autonomy and authority over their own what's going to happen to them might even add a little bit extra amount of, I'm not going to do that because I chose what's going to happen to me, and I definitely don't want that thing to happen to me. Instead of the thing of like, oh, well, they're making me say I have to do this thing, and then I'm just going to do it anyways, and, fuck them. But I don't know. I don't know if that's a viable idea.
Well, it's interesting we had this conversation because I've studied in part a little bit about this type of structure. Sure. And the feeling of it for an individual would be, first of all, this level of like dominance, right? So if someone tries to either avoid dominance in their own life, their experience as an individual, or dominate others in a sense to maybe even avoid being dominated or to feel like they've been enhancing something, right? And this is really the traditional organizational structure in companies and that we kind of see in the United States of being hierarchy. But then we can actually move into a higher level from the hierarchy into one called like synarchy, right? Which looks a lot more like the neurons in a brain, where you get rid of this hierarchical, even patriarchal organizational structure that is really birthed in the family. Like the father is the head and both of the parents are ahead of the kids. And you see that everywhere, right? Then you go to school, it's like the teacher is ahead of you. You move into your business and then you have your leadership set up in a hierarchical structure. Actually, the first place you can go is move into one that's very like lateral, where you empower individual groups that don't report to anybody, but you are in a sense aligned in the same vision. And so you'll have a group of people over here that play their role in having that vision be fulfilled. And within an organization, you have this open communication structure across all of these, what you might think of as departments, but they don't report to anybody. And so you allow people's individual gifts to come out and for, as you were talking about, intrinsic reward systems to be available within that.
Yep.
And then there's even then it becomes a little bit further where this sort of, what you might think of the experience of going from synergy now up to like communion, where you kind of even get rid of that lateral system and you build these sort of organizations around a central hub. And then if you can think of then these hubs, which is kind of what you're talking about. So that's kind of a place I feel like as far as organizational structure, and then the feeling of it for an individual is where in your life do you feel dominance, and then moving that expression into, synergy, and then the highest level being this communion. So whatever action I feel like that leads us to, that's the experience that we can kind of follow to say, where am I experiencing dominance? How can I show up, and how can we create synergy moving higher into this experience of communion where we kind of all serve a vision, and then all of that comes together to serve this vision for higher level human evolution.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this is a fascinating concept. And actually, I don't know if you know much about the holocratic structure, holacracy. Have you heard much about that?
No, I haven't.
It's an interesting way. It's kind of like what you're talking about. I think it's the what was the second one you mentioned? Synergy, the synergistic one.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, and then applied to a company like Zappos, that would be a perfect example of the communion type, right? Because Zappos already has the kind of vision and their really hardcore set values and a goal they're going after, and then they just applied this holocratic structure, which is I'm interested to see how it kind of plays out.
Mm-hmm.
It's still kind of, I mean, it's been probably 2 or 3 years they've implemented it now, so I'd like to go in and actually find out. I want to go take their tour and talk to some of their employees and learn more about it. But it's very it's all about kind of creating these circles, and within these teams you kind of do exactly that. You choose how you're going to operate, how you want to move forward, and even as it gets up to the more leadership team, it's not really that they're above everyone else. They're just working on higher level concepts, and that's kind of their roles. You define and set your own roles within these kind of what they define as circles.
Yeah.
And you can move people between circles, and there's different communication systems between dealing with them. It's really a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
I recommend people check it out.
Just around other companies that have interesting structures, Ray Dalio's, you familiar with the name?
Yeah, I love him.
Where it's all based on open feedback, where you're actually encouraged to give anybody in the company any feedback.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for a lot of people. I heard him say that only a third of people make it past 12 months.
Yeah.
But then those that do, and the community and the environment that's created is what has allowed his hedge fund company to be the largest in the world.
It irons out any kinks. 'Cause it's oh, this is straight. It's open. Things are out front, and how they need to be seen to overcome and deal with problems, especially problems that often in most companies won't get acknowledged because people are too afraid to say something about it.
Yeah.
And by actually saying something and being open, people are able to deal with them, get them out in the open, and resolve them. Mm-hmm. And if they don't get resolved, then you bring someone else in to help with the resolution.
Yeah. And as for the individual, he said this, which I thought was really powerful. If you can't operate in that type of system, you're either interested in how you look to other people, or you're interested in performance. Mm-hmm. Those are only two places. And if you're interested in performance and getting better, then you're able to receive that feedback. Those that can't, they're interested in their image, how people see them, how they're perceived. And it breaks it down to pretty simple two worlds.
Yeah.
Right? Am I actually out here to serve and perform to make things better? Or am I concerned maybe with my own, we could call this ego, and how I look and how I'm perceived by the people, also because that gives me some sense of value because I'm concerned about how other people view me.
Yeah, man. Feedback is so tricky, but
it is.
Every time, too, I go to get feedback on something, I'll get the feedback, and oh, no, screw you, God, no, I know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, no, JP, calm down. That's just your ego flaring up. Chill out. And then, but I like that flare up, honestly. I've learned to like kind of be like, that's actually a good thing, because then I'll just like so in depth think through what they're talking about, and even though I like won't maybe use their direct feedback, I'll go and like start playing with it, and I'll have that in the back of my head, even if it's something I didn't like, but I'll start playing with it, and it'll lead me to something that just makes whatever I was working on much better.
Yeah.
And so it's always a better decision to get feedback.
One thing it makes me think of, I think it's a timing thing. So what I found is if you can at least ask people's permission before you give the feedback. I don't know if Ray implements this, but if I'm like walking around and I'm like focused on a task, or I've got a vision, I'm creating something, and someone comes out of the blue and just gives me this feedback, isn't this really not going to work? But if you can just get someone's permission and say, hey, you know what, I have actually feedback on how you showed up, or how that presentation was, or even for romantic relationships, which obviously my specialty, rather than just giving your partner feedback, whatever maybe you're in business together, shoot, even around your own intimacy, I did a podcast yesterday about being able to share your intimacy level of satisfaction with your partner. Now, once again, not to interrupt and disrupt what they're doing and just throw feedback out there, but say, hey, I'm interested in us getting better and actually have some feedback. Would you like to hear it? And they can even pause and say yes or no, or yes and how about in an hour?
Yeah, because like I'm exactly all those other things in my head, like I just can't hear that right now.
Yeah.
Let's do it in a minute.
So I think permission is probably something for an individual's level, those that are listening. How can you implement this feedback and give feedback and get interested in performance? How can we build better relationships? How we build human capital? I think it's being able to give open feedback, and one that's based on permission.
Without a doubt. That's so important. And how I like to give feedback too, on top of that, like asking for permission, like, hey, it's cool if I give you a little feedback, I have something to say. I also say, like, you don't have to use any of this. I give them permission to not even use my feedback, so they hopefully will adopt a little bit easier to the where I'm like, there's no weight put on this for you to accept what I'm saying. This is just how I see the thing. Take it for what it will. Use what you like. I even usually say that. Use what you like and take what you don't.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it's that word. You get what I'm saying.
Well, one thing I also think is powerful to share is what your commitment is. Because you can say, hey, I would like to give you some feedback, and it's because I know that you're an awesome salesperson, or I know that what I'm committed to in our romantic relationship is it being more connected. So if you share your higher level commitment, like I'm sharing this with you so that we can be more connected, we have more love available, or in this community that we're talking about, I'm committed to our team, our little community here, having the food that we need, or having the connection that we need, or having the housing, or whatever it is. If you share what your commitment is, which actually I think it can lead us into this next question of identity, you kind of raise up this idea of you're doing it for a collective. You're doing it for something higher than just diminishing the person that you're standing in front of.
Totally, right, which is the overall goal. So yeah, like playing into what you're just about to say, identity and all that, how do we help as we build this community? Maybe what are some of the ways that you think we could develop it so people can formulate and enjoy adopting feedback and giving it better? Like, what are some of the ways to build that into a person's identity as they grow up and form into an adult?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to steal this from a guy I listen to named Sadhguru. He runs this Isha Foundation, and he's a traditional yogic guru. So this might not be from like a blank slate or nothing, but when I heard him say this, I thought it was it's phenomenal. And in India, they don't do it as much anymore, but select places still use it. They don't use a traditional educational system, meaning there's not a child that at 5 years old goes and starts to develop their intellect. What they would focus on is developing their identity first. And it's something that I'm not as familiar with the United States educational system besides what I went through. But we typically try and add intellect to a human being as early as we can, because we see intellect and knowledge as the most important thing. But in certain sectors in India, they go to raise the level of the identity of a child before adding intellect and intelligence to it. So there's really there's a level here. So we can identify ourselves as an individual from a physical standpoint, like this physical body. Then there's like a second level of we can identify ourselves as a personal level, right? The roles that I play, the job that they have, the career, maybe being a mother or a father or a husband or a wife. Even our own name, we identify, I'm Aaron and I have these traits, right? So it's very personal. That's where most people stop. And then they add intelligence to that, and in a sense, any intelligence added to a limited identity causes separation. But if we can raise the level of our own identity to go further than that, to next would be relational level. I relate to, in this case, like Jocelyn, my wife, and myself, there's the relationship identity. Like I identify with who I am as the relationship. And you can do that with any relationship.
Sure.
With a friend, with a significant other. And then above that, you can relate to a group. And you can really see this play out a lot. Like, for instance, like different religious organizations and church, people identify themselves as, let's say, a Christian or Jewish in a couple of religious sense. But you can even see it play out in sports. It's like a huge place where you can see this. People, yeah.
Are beholden to their team.
See, it's a perfect example of people relating to themselves from a group or what could be called a system level. So who I am is, I could say, a Cleveland Browns fan because I'm from Ohio, or a Raiders fan, for instance. And now all of a sudden, when you think about when someone subconsciously relates to themselves as who I am as a Raiders fan, now all of a sudden you're a part of like a huge group of people and you show up to the stadium and now you're not just yourself, who you are as a Raiders fan. And now you actually can experience yourself. You could go up to a stranger and they're wearing, they have black and gray paint on their face. And all of a sudden you can be so much more related to somebody else because you're both Raiders fans. You're identifying with a much higher level of identity. And on some level, not to throw this out there for Raiders fans, but people will, they've been known to like stab other fans. Like, why would you do that over your team? Like, but you're so identified with being a Raiders fan. Yeah. Or you might see a fight break out and you don't even know the people, but if they're fighting, I don't know, like Rams fans, you're going to jump in there and you'll fight somebody. That's right.
Yeah.
So that actually just goes to show how strong this level of identity is. And if it wasn't used to continue to separate us, but you can just see how you can really incorporate yourself into a much higher level. Sports really gives us that look. But you can even go higher than that. You can go to raising your identity to the level of a principle. So you go from a group or system to a principle, and this is a place that will be a huge transformation for our society, I believe, where you identify with the principle of peace, let's say, or freedom or equality, something like that. And I was trying to think of somebody that really embodied that, and I would say Mother Teresa really did, right?
Interesting.
So she gave herself to the identity higher than her physical body, her personality, even a group of, existing inside of the religion of Catholic, to like service, to support, to, I don't know what principle she identified with, but you can see the ripple effect. It's had a huge impact. She's seen as a saint.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's the word people use.
Yeah.
Something good. Like,
yeah.
Another Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
I don't know really anything about what things she really did. Like, I don't really know. I kind of know, but don't really know what she did.
Yeah. I think mostly, fed the homeless, just gave as much support to people, primarily I think in Calcutta, in that part of the world, a lot of people that were sick or diseased. And, so she gave herself. Who she was something much higher. It was a principle. And then there's the highest level. The highest level is universal, where there's probably been a few people that have embodied this, those religious type of avatars like Jesus or maybe Buddha or something like that, where who they are is actually the whole of humanity. So that's the scale of raising yourself to expanding your identity. So I think that's really the place to go to, why relationships are so important to me, because that's at least one level higher than myself in a sense. But as a collective, if we can raise our identity to who we are as high as universal, it's connection and well-being for all humanity is the primary focus, then, I mean, I don't even know what problems we'd have anymore.
Right, and I think that's kind of, in a sense, the point is to get to this point of, well, I mean, we still have problems. I think you'd still have, little quarrels and people get angry and you have emotions that flare out. But, people will be better equipped to deal with them.
Right,
We're
yeah.
talking to this point, right? People will be better equipped. It wouldn't become this whole, traumatic experience. Be like, okay, I understand what's going on here. I know how to deal with this. Now we can all move past it and move better. And I think one of the ideas I really like is wisdom, is creating this idea of helping people really become wise in their life and creating a wise society. So it's taking that idea of, whether it be emotional wisdom as well as intellectual wisdom, intelligence, but also, connection and things of that nature. So yeah, let's say we did it. Let's say we successfully built this society, and people are openly communicating honestly and empathetically. What exactly might that look like?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't even know. For one, this makes me think that people would be immediately related to each other. And walking down the street, I don't know who walks down the street anymore. Maybe you were riding a scooter down the street. I don't know. But when you came across people, whether you're at a store or some type of event or where, your job, well, number one, I think going back to our first conversation, I think money would be gone in this society. I think we would see that there are much more valuable resources than money per se. So there'd be a higher level of shared resources.
Sure.
I think the boundaries of countries would probably start to diminish. One day someone drew up plans and that said, this is North America, this is South America, this is the state of Arizona, but who really said? And then going back to our raising of identity, it's like we even relate to ourselves as Americans, right? That's really a sense of the group level of American citizen, or maybe like an Arizonian or wherever. And when you think about that, it's like, so someone decided to draw some lines on a map, right? And that's what really had you identify with that so hard. So I think maybe some of the lines on a map in geography would start to disappear, that we would start to actually see ourselves as just all human, all really going through the same types of things, and really more intentional about what someone else was going through, and not just be empathetic with them, but we'd probably see it as that's something we can raise together as a collective. Like, that's really where innovation kind of comes from, right? Anytime there's been sort of a resistance, or someone at one point had to ride a horse all the way across America, and their experience was, this takes forever. Like, there should be a better way. Right? And that's kind of how we got to carts, and then we got to cars, and then planes. And, there's always, I was even reading about this today, this is like called contrast, right? People think like things that they don't desire, or things that are painful, things that have birthed contrast in our lives. If we could start to see them as opportunities, and not only opportunities, but benefits for things that we do desire, that's kind of how innovation has always happened. That's how we have cell phones and we have skyscrapers. So in a sense, this community would start to see that what someone else was going through was a place to start asking more questions about, to provide something more beneficial to society as a whole. So I think people would just be more interested in each other. And again, we've been raising this level of identity, but not even from like, I'm interested in and empathetic in what JP's going through, but like we would connect on, I don't know, you had to walk too far to the store. So we would come together and say, well, if that's what you're experiencing, like the contrast of what must that mean that we could create together so that no one else ever has to experience the pain of walking in the snow in the dark to the store. I don't know, I'm just making things up.
You're 100% on point, and that's another thing I would like to implement in a society like this is moving more away from production for the sake of production. I think it's cool, and there's going to be a necessary need for it, don't get me wrong. However, I think it's so much better to focus on, and look how, like, you know, society came together, you know, the American society at least came together during the space race to go to the moon, and how it's slowly happening right now with going to Mars and whatever. Like, people like that idea of discovery and exploration. And I think that's really what this society should be about, is discovery and scientific exploration, in a sense. And really I think it should be about figuring out, which people are working to do, but just like all wholly together being like, hey, we're really trying to figure out what's going on here in this weird, crazy universe that we're all a little confused about and all want to know more about.
Yeah.
Let's really work together to make sure that that happens. And everything we do plays towards that. Because right now I feel like science is kind of like it's there and people like it and some people find it interesting, but it's kind of like shoved to the side in like a little back corner. Because like there's not much like funding really. It's like kind of hard for scientists to get funding and research grants unless it's like about, you know, producing and growing, you know, DARPA or the military or some kind of product. I think it should be reversed. Science should be the forefront, pushing everything, and then other things should just be like a consequence of the awesome discoveries that get made because of science.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And when you say science, you know, it makes you think of even in the realms of psychology and developing your mindset, your belief system. Yeah, I think, consciousness, absolutely. And it just made me think of one thing, and then I totally forgot.
That's fine. I do that all the time. I've done this podcast several times. So let's go on to this question. What might we not be able to implement across the society? Like, where might be some of the hurdles in creating, you know, effective communication and open communication structures, and how might that not be fully adopted?
And I remember the other thing I was going to say. It makes me think, first of all, in what we were talking about actually is little segue. What I believe the purpose of life is for any individual is to create. So we come here, and in essence, we have things happen in our life. Sometimes not what we were expecting, sometimes could be painful. But inside of that, if we look, that actually allowed for a new desire, a new way you'd like to experience it to arise. You know, for instance, for me in relationships, there were ones that always caused me pain. I was always broken up with. I mean, even until I was 28 years old. I had been cheated. Yeah, you know, I was cheated on. So relationships were very painful. But I focused on it being painful, and that caused me the belief that maybe I'm not meant for a relationship. I'm probably never going to get married. But if I focused on that, this feeling of not being valued, rather than focusing on that this contrast birthed in me a desire for a partner, for connection, for living a life together, then we see everything that happens to us burst this desire. So for us to take this desire, this thought, this internal almost fire or passion for something else to come into being, then we now do whatever we're called to, guided to have that become so, like take form. And that could be in organizations, that can be in technology. You know, this is really what I refer to as manifesting, taking something from non-physical, like a thought or desire, and having it become physical. And we do that with money, we do that with relationships. So that's really the purpose, right? We really came here to continuously create things from things that we don't want, allow us to see what we do want, and then having that give us the actions and the guidance to create the structures or create companies to allow for these things to be, as I like to say, birthed into the world for it to benefit ourselves and people and just for the fun of actually creating things. So that really is the purpose, I believe, of being alive, and relationships actually allow for that to happen faster. Like, so the purpose of relationship is to co-create, because now you get to reflect back to me aspects and things that I didn't see. And if we can come together, it happens faster, right? So we get to co-create. So that was one of the things I just wanted to bring up that I don't think quite answered your first question, but is what we came here to do. So your question being, what's going to be the hurdle? I think it's hard for people to be in this creation space if their initial needs aren't met. Kind of even circling back to where we were. If someone's like really hungry, if they haven't eaten, if they haven't slept, if they don't have shelter, if they don't experience safety and security, then it's hard for them to be in a place of being inspired and following the guidance to have something be created.
Sure.
So initially, I think that's the hurdle. If someone their basic needs aren't being met, you could even say your human needs of connection and significance and growth, certainty and uncertainty, then you're not in the best space to allow for things to be created.
Yeah, great point, man. Great monologue there, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word for it, but yeah, I like what you said there. I think you're right on point. Creating is something I love doing. Like I identify myself as a maker and a creator. I mean, I guess technically created this podcast, which is cool.
Yeah, you did.
And it's just, there is something that comes of it, even through the process of bringing something to be that wasn't. That you're like, oh, I have this way I see it in my head, and it comes out, and I made it exist. And there's, so much that changes, and it's never like quite right, that idea, but bringing that to be and creating something, there's just something so satisfying and so rewarding to doing that.
Yeah.
And it's a weird reward, too. It's not really a reward of the finished product is nice, but it really is the process, right? Like even in like creating this podcast, like as I've launched it finally, and people have been like, oh, that's really cool, like, congratulations. Like I have this weird, like, I appreciate the congratulations, of course, right? But I'm also like, yeah, I didn't do anything yet. Like I just got it out, which for me is like, that's just kind of like, I'm only on step one of 150,000. Not quite that, but like I'm on step one of like really the congratulations I want is when it's kind of churning and like really operating well and smoothly, and there are people who are like really engaging and listening to it. That's when I feel congratulations is like really worth it. Like right now it's like I got to also make sure I'm sticking with it, because I also know kind of my own what's the word I'm looking for? Pattern of behavior can be sometimes like start something and then get it to a point where like it's kind of somewhere, but then I'll just kind of let it go. And I've designed this podcast in a way so that won't happen, and I just need to prove to myself that that's not going to happen with this. But I don't know. I went off on a little bit of a tangent.
No, I think that's really great. That's one of the things I think for any listener to even start to take away is in this realm of creation, we're always meant to create. And so in a sense, I mean, you could say future or forward looking. If we were to really break that down consciously, it's really more like being in the present moment every time. But in a sense, it's a fine balance between when we've achieved or created something, being grateful and appreciative, and this level of satisfaction for what is, like the way it is, and having total gratitude for exactly the way it is. And then in a sense, we're always creating forward. So people get stopped when they start focusing on like what has already become, whether it's a certain amount in a bank account or having a business at a particular place, or I'm always going to go back to relationships, right? Sure. There's a sense of getting to a place where I've gotten married, we have this home, we have these good jobs, and that's why, Jocelyn, I feel like relationships and marriages are still divorcing at a 50% rate is because they stop creating together. So you've gotten to this place where you had a desire, in this case, to be in a relationship, to be married, to have a home, and you were creating all along that way, and then all of a sudden you stop. And in a lot of relationships, they stop creating together. So now you're in the patterns that you were talking about. I go to work, I make a paycheck. All of a sudden, before you know it, it's pretty mundane and routine. You've lost the passion and desire. You're not as intimate with your partner as you've been. And all of a sudden you're like, what happened? Like, should I be in this relationship? I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. And it's all because you stopped creating. So in a sense, it's not to say I'm not satisfied with the way things are, hence that drive to keep moving forward. But it is a sense I am exactly satisfied, and I'm appreciative of what I've had to do to take this desire I've had, and I've actually created it to this point. Like, well, I'm a creator. but we've always got to be creating forward. And I think as a society, we always need to be creating forward while having the appreciation for exactly what is.
So how do we help people to formulate that kind of viewpoint and perspective in a society, do you think? What would be some of the ways to adopt that?
I think having a podcast like yours. I mean, really, any place this conversation can exist. I think conversation, I think language, I think connection is where life actually exists. So the more that people are diving into this type of conversation, so whether it be a podcast or, influencers that are out there with big YouTube channels or putting on seminars and events out of their own creation for this type of conversation. I mean, I think it's already started, and I think it's a place to be.
That's within this society, right? I'm talking about within the one that we're going
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Would be clear.
Well, my thought would be really like a simple line of questioning. So in this society, whenever someone gets frustrated, and we'll just call it frustrated or get upset, then going back to, rather than looking at, I'm frustrated because I had an expectation and something didn't turn out, just to have this group of people pause and say, actually, that's great. Like, tell me more about what you were frustrated in, what expectation you had. And rather than focusing on that, let's say then, what did that launch in you? So if you know what you don't want now out of the situation, what does that show you that you do want? And I think that gives us a space to really discover almost an infinite amount of things, because it will be birthed out of the individual, be birthed out of the human collective. So it's really about allowing, I think, the space of inquiry that's outside of the personal, right? When you ask questions that isn't about the personal ego, that's where you always get creation. That's where you always get innovation. So.
You hit that one on the head, man. Questioning and inquiry, that's the ticket. That's the real ticket. I say that all the time. Like, the real answer is often the question, right? That's where you're gonna, the right questions asked at the right times, can open up so much for you. And even sometimes you don't even need an answer, and you're like, oh, that was the answer. And
I love that you said that. And in a sense, well, this would be deeper, but there's always another question. So there really is never actually an answer. There's really just the next question, in a sense. But I think, having appreciation all along that journey, I think you almost always lead to another question.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. It's almost like doing that NLP technique, the whys, the 5 whys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty popular one. And it's a solid technique. For those of you who don't know what the 5 whys is, it's just literally whatever the problem is, and then, or whatever you're dealing with, and you ask yourself, well, why is it you do that? And then once you come to an answer, you ask, well, why that? You ask, why that? And then it takes you down this spiraling hole, and then you kind of loop back around, or you hit a pause, and you're like, oh, well, it really wasn't this thing that I thought it was that was the problem. It was this deeper thing that was an issue. So, yeah, man. We'll see where this one goes. I don't know how this question is going to turn out, but I'm going to ask it, and if you don't want to answer, we're going to have to go down this road. Might it be helpful to have a role in the government structure whose sole role is to analyze how people are communicating in the society and work to make adjustments if the society is leaning more towards, say, deceitful, closed, and harmful communication? How might we help the society, or how might it utterly fail?
That's great. I think when you brought up government, it almost fast-forwarded us more into the society we have now. So it made me think, let's go back to this society that we're just making up. And I think rather than maybe it being a government type of understanding.
Yeah, government, I don't love the word, but it's something people just understand. But feel free to continue.
I think what you brought up and what we were both talking about in this synarchy environment where you have sort of, I like the word team, you have these communities or teams that one of these teams would exactly have that type of responsibility of, we're actually going to take on how communication is flowing between these teams or all teams or our whole society, So I think it would be like if you set up a department, you'd be in the Department of Communications. So not like a government, because the government, in our case, has a lot of different roles, from military to setting legislation and all that stuff. It has to do with a range of things. It's almost like if we took our government now, where you have the Department of Defense, you have your Department of Agriculture. It wasn't all under federal government, maybe. You just broke those out into teams. And you went out and then you were empowered to work with whoever you wanted and not under any particular structure, in a sense, what we talked about. I feel like that would be the society. So one group would be like, yeah, we're the communications team.
I love it. Yeah, that's a better way to do it. Everyone's kind of got their person that, or their team within their little community that kind of helps navigate issues that arise and help kind of iron out whatever it may be and get people on board with communicating better.
Yeah. And you could also even work with people that, so if I like communication, I love communication, and I love, in this case, the vision for water, people having clean water, or I love technology, it's like I can go to those people, I can go to those groups, and I can help them communicate. And maybe even after I feel like that got worked out, I can just move on to communication between another group.
Yeah, I like it. Well, yeah, I mean, that's all the questions I really have. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we kind of move on to the more or less wrap-up question?
No, I think these have been really great questions, and hopefully some of the listeners can see in this exploration some places where they can take on some different roles for themselves, or I would say even ask themselves better questions. And I'll just leave with this part. We doubt, the experience of doubt comes up when it's personal. So if we ask ourselves personal questions, then it can lead to self-doubt, or it can lead to suspicion, right? If I make it personal, I'm suspicious of this other person's intent or why they want to be president or whatever. So I'm either suspicious of other people or I doubt myself. But if I can let go that a question or the experience of doubt is personal, doubt always leads to inquiry. So if there's a particular doubt and it's not personal to me, that leads me to an inquiry. So it's more of an inquiry about what it can mean for other people or community or society, right? So it's really just moving. Anytime a listener out there is experiencing doubt in their own life, see if you can let go of it being personal to you, and then see what the question then reveals to you.
I like it. I love it, actually. Phenomenal. So with that, how can people help you, and where can they find you on the internet?
Oh, great question. Well, my wife and I are really about empowering relationships and empowering marriages for couples to fulfill their dreams together, and ultimately that we lower the divorce rate. And when, for us, relationships are thriving, like marriages, so much that we talked about, I know leads to society being more connected. So on Instagram, we are at meet_the Freemans, and the website being meetthefreemans.com. For us, it's starting with marriages and having couples feel empowered, fulfill their dreams together, be co-creating together ongoingly, leading to fulfillment and achievement in their own life and marriage. And I am standing behind that. When you have marriages that are feeling and operating like that all the relationships around them will be impacted, and the ripple effect is huge.
Awesome, man. Yeah, go check them out. They're great people. I'm glad to get to call them friends. And Jocelyn was supposed to come on today, but she wasn't able to make it. I'd love to have her on again another time if she wants to. And
yeah.
You're welcome to come. We can do it alone with her, however you guys want to set that up. Or we can do one alone with her and then a third, both of you together.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for taking the time every day to come and chat about new societies.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think just the conversation itself is actually what can allow some of these things to be birthed.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.